we are now live with City Comptroller Scott Stringer. Scott has been State Assembly member, Manhattan Borough President for a couple of terms, now City Comptroller and candidate for mayor. Scott, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening to talk about this. May be the first ever real mayoral forum on bikes. And, you've put together, a really extensive policy. There's a lot to like, a lot to talk about in there. You want to hit the highlights for us? Give us, the points you want us to notice and spotlight and focus on.
Sure. Well, John, thank you for this opportunity, and for everybody from Bike New York. And John, thank you for your leadership as well. Look, let me start off by just saying or stating the obvious. We have three crises in this city right now, all at the same time. It's about public health, it's about economic security, and it's about social justice. And the truth is, the people hit hardest during this pandemic were the people already struggling in our neighborhoods with higher asthma rates, trapped between highways and peaker plants, the worst access to parks and open space, the fewest protected bike lanes. There's no secret that these are most often communities of color outside of Manhattan. So we're going to have to take this recovery to our streets, and that starts with reclaiming our streets for people and our communities. Now, you talk about the 17-point transportation plan that I call Our Streets, Our Recovery, and it is a blueprint for becoming the streets mayor that New York City needs. And one of my top goals in my first term will be to double bike ridership in New York City. From more than 21 million trips per year, that's pre-pandemic, let's double that. And then we're going to deliver major investments in bike infrastructure to get there. So a couple of points I want to make. We've got to build out hundreds of miles of protected and separated bike lanes, to doubling bike parking spaces, because if we're going to have double the bikes, we're going to have double the parking spaces. We have to make sure that's in every neighborhood. And also, we got to keep the bike lanes clear from cars, from trash, from snow. We need better enforcement, more cameras, redesigned streets, and a maintenance revamp. And we have to actually align our bike network where New Yorkers need to go. So this is about making sure we have a network to our jobs, to schools, to stores, and other modes of transportation. That is why I'm here tonight, because this is not just about my candidacy, but this is about opening up the economy differently than we closed it. And I believe a bike network is essential to our economic recovery.
Scott, I noticed today, our colleagues at Transportation Alternatives released an agenda for a sweeping overhaul. The streets sound very similar to what you're just describing, but they're also talking about busways and pedestrian streets and open streets and low traffic neighborhoods. And I love all that stuff. That's my bread and butter. But I'm also very concerned, not just with the numbers and how we quantify it, but my background is kind of a Rorschach, test for you guys in terms of what our so-called protected bike lanes look like today. How do we get at that sort of quality issue? How do we do these things in a way where they actually work for people on bikes?
So, John, this is how I look at it. I'm an older dad, so I have two young boys. I have a 9-year-old and 7-year-old, and I worry about them out in the streets. And we've seen the terrible tragedies of our children just mowed down by sanitation trucks and you name it. I'm not just pointing out that, but so many different tragedies. So when we think about our bike network, we have to design bike lanes, not just by throwing paint on the street and calling it a bike lane, but we really have to think about safety. We have to separate the bike lanes from pedestrians, from cars. We have to use, I think, our children as the barometer of whether we think a bike lane is safe. We don't want to have a crossing at the Brooklyn Bridge or a crowded intersection and invoke anxiety and fear. And that is why, in addition to the bike network, I do want to scale back our highways in favor of greenways and new transportation alternatives. That's real things that we can do. We do not have to simply, throw a bike lane together the old way. we should really think about what a protective bike lane looks like. And I think a protective bike lane should be through the lens of the kids.
So, to do all those big things you're talking about, it probably invokes the lesson we've been learning for at least 8 years, which is that leaving all of this to one part of DOT isn't sufficient. Like it takes a whole city government. And so can you talk a little bit, like, what does it look like next year in a Stringer administration, where you bring those resources together to say, we're going to enforce it, we're going to separate it, we're going to figure out how to maintain it. What sort of paint a picture of your administration taking that on?
Well, look, one of the advantage about being controller is I have a unique understanding of city operations and everyday practice. I've audited city agencies, including the DOT, and I know that right now our streets are managed by a jumble of agencies that are at best failing to coordinate, and at worst, they're actively working against each other. So we have DOT and NYPD, sanitation, DEP, the alphabets, right? And we have this thing called the Public Design Commission. If we're gonna transform the streets, we gotta end the agency chaos. So the way I would approach this from a management perspective, I would grant greater power to the DOT commissioner, including more control over construction projects, also greater authority concerning the priorities and deployment of traffic enforcement agents. Also, I'm going to do something that I think would be very powerful. I'm going to create an office of public space. And what's that office going to do? Well, we're going to break silos. We're going to end agency infighting. I want to ensure that the pillars of this construction, enforcement, and maintenance and sanitation are aligned, because we got to deliver our goals for bike-friendly streets, but we also have to do that through community-friendly streets and people-friendly streets. And that means breaking down the bureaucracy. And I believe that the way we do this is we manage the hell out of this town, that we just don't talk the talk, but we bring advocates, stakeholders, bike riders, parents into the system. I have this great vision that I know many of you share, to create a bike network and give out the bikes to the high school kids, so we get them biking at the earliest age, we get them moving their bodies, and we get them out there. But let me tell you something, we got to make sure they're safe, and we have to make sure that the bureaucracy isn't taking over. And I think this is a real opportunity.
We have a nascent program that Bike New York has helped to establish in middle schools, where you get on bike instruction, but it's one of those Frankenstein monsters of city government right now, where it's funded by DOT and only gets traction in a school if the principal wants it or okays it. So it's been limited to only 26 of like the hundreds of middle schools that we have. So it'd be great once the system's back on its feet, if we could get to that, to be more integral to the to the actual school system, and some of the instruction that kids are able to get.
Well, look, I'm not one of these. I try not to be the politician that makes a lot of big promises and has no idea how to implement the plan. But I have thought about this. I've talked to experts in the city, advocates, people who really understand transportation, hint, talking to people like yourself. Look, I think our bike to school plan, how's this for something that's real? How about 75 miles of protected bike lanes around 50 high schools in 5 years? And then pedestrianize the blocks immediately in front of the schools too. And that gives parents a sense of safety. And then we coordinate the bike giveaways so that a kid, regardless of income, can get their bike. And look, I remember, I hearken back to two things in my life. I remember the sense of freedom I felt growing up in Washington Heights when I got my 3-speed bike. I didn't want a 10-speed bike. I wanted a 3-speed bike. And look, there were no rules of the roads back then, and there were no bike lanes. So I survived the in and out of cars. The things that we did, I would never allow my little kids to do. But I also remember feeling so proud that when the first bike came for my 2 little ones, on their training wheels, and then they took the training wheels off. But they need, in New York City, as they get older, places to go safely. And what a great sense of freedom for kids as they become teenagers, to not only be able to have a bike, but also to have a place to ride the bike to and from school. And let's also talk about how to park the bike, right? Because bike parking is going to be essential. If you take away one parking space, you tell me how many bikes we can fit into that parking space on a street. It would be really incredible. We would transform our streets with an open street plan like we've never seen. And we're this close in the next administration to doing this, especially with this plan we proposed.
I mean, that sounds fantastic, and these sort of visions that we're drawing out are great. But it's very hard to go in any direction from any place in the city without feeling like illegal parking is just completely out of control. Sidewalks, bike lanes is almost a given. Bus stops, there's just sort of informal parking lots in strange nooks of the city all over the place. So, do you feel like we can really wrestle that to the ground, or it's really gone pretty far down, a path of disorder and just anything goes when it comes to leaving your car somewhere?
Well, look, we have to address the car culture head on. That's why the BQE plan I have is about less cars, more open space. I want to deck our superhighways and fundamentally change that in a big way, because that reduces asthma, that fights climate change, and we now have a federal government to do that. I want us to consider how we get to, say, a car-free Manhattan and start thinking about different strategies around that. And part of what our plan includes, which I think is very exciting and doable, is, and I say this with the lens of getting to 0 deaths and injuries in New York City, because that is where the pain and the heartache has come. Anytime you stood with parents, it is just so sad, and government has to take this seriously. So, a couple of things. Can we, post-COVID, with stimulus money, really talk about widening sidewalks? I do think the key to any plan is slow streets and play streets. And I mean slow streets, because we all know, and you've brought these statistics to light, the faster a car goes, if you get hit by a car, that speed will determine whether you live or die or get seriously injured. That's why I want to reiterate full protected bike lanes. And also we have to improve enforcement of traffic. Once we start doing all this in a holistic way, not with a jumble of agencies, but real management, that also includes, by the way, keeping bike lanes clear. And that also has to deal with snow removal, the appropriate use of sanitation vehicles that, by the way, I think the sanitation department should be purchasing, not individual council members, because that's not coordinated and focused. So these are some of the things we have to really think about.
So that's a lot of change for anybody to propose and take, and the beauty of city government is the mayor can say, I want it, do it. Here's your deadline, here's your resources. But then you still have the public to deal with. So what's the process you see for doing that? Because today we engage in this kind of mile by mile trench warfare for every bike lane, every bus lane, every parking space repurposed for something else. How would you frame it for the public, and then how would you approach community boards, which tend to be the focuses of these kind of discussions about process?
Look, one of the things I bring to this discussion in a very serious way is my experience as borough president, working on issues with community boards and building consensus and creating a community planning process with the end goal in sight, which is making sure that we can have those discussions about reimagining open streets, especially post-pandemic. That is something that I am very committed to, but there does have to be a skill in building consensus and making sure that we can talk with communities. And I'm very excited to have that discussion. I want to have a discussion about our Office of Public Space. I want to have a discussion of breaking silos and ending, agency mishmash. And That is going to take some real leadership. And I hope to be able to bring that experience to the table. And look, it's not easy. Discussions sometimes are painful, but I do believe we can build consensus.
We have on the books the law creating the street master plan. And I think that was one of the council's attempts to try to redefine the process so that it wasn't so painful. It didn't allow neighborhoods necessarily to opt out, but still gave them a lot of input into the process. And we haven't seen that sort of start or be realized. And I hope it actually is delayed enough so that the new mayor owns whatever the street master plan is, and it's not a handoff from a departing administration. But do you feel like the street master plan is a framework that will allow you to do what you were just describing?
Look, I support the council's vision, and we're going to go further with a real plan to make it happen. I do think talk is cheap, and aspirational plans are, make for exciting town hall meetings like this. But I do think we need a mayor who, again, has the skill and the vision to get things done. This is not simply to talk about it, but you have to go inside city government, inside City Hall, with an empowered DOT commissioner to get this agenda. And I will tell you, and I'll commit to this, I'll go as mayor to the community boards. I'll build consensus around the table. It's what I did as Manhattan Borough President. I actually like that kind of work. I don't want to admit to how many meetings I've spent at community board meetings, but I would guess if you took the 40 candidates for mayor combined, no one has spent more time at community board meetings than me. Now I could look back on my life and say, what was I thinking? But I do believe in consensus-driven issues. And look, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have an overall plan, because we don't want people to simply veto good, strong environmental ideas. Part of looking at, our dedicated lanes and bike lanes, for example, we've got to make sure that we do not have cars coming in and blocking. So we need traffic enforcement strategies. When we say dedicated bike lanes, we should mean it and we should enforce it. And I think that's the work that we have to do. And I'll do it, because part of being mayor is to be strong and resilient. And while you build consensus, you also have to stick to your guns and your values. And by the way, the reason I put out this plan, people know what they're getting if I get elected. I put out the most forward-thinking climate change plan. Please read it. Of our transportation plan and the work that we've modeled after you and so many other people. And people know my affordable housing plan, and more is coming. I do think this election is about two things: forward-thinking progressive vision, and then who has the management chops and the experience to do this work on day one.